The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with the familiar sound of alien languages mixing together like a symphony of clicks, whistles, and electronic pulses. Representatives from 47 different species sat in their designated sections, each area designed to accommodate their unique physiological needs. The Zelkari delegation floated in their atmospheric bubbles, while the rock-like Thuronians sat motionless on reinforced platforms that could support their massive weight. At the center of it all stood Commander Elena Vasquez, the first human ever to address the Galactic Council. She wore the standard-issue uniform of the Terran Defense Force, dark blue with silver trim, and carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from 20 years of military service. Her weathered hands rested calmly at her sides, though she could feel the weight of 47 pairs of alien eyes studying her every movement. The Council had been debating Earth's application for membership for 3 standard galactic cycles. Today would determine whether humanity joined the vast network of civilized species or remained isolated on their small blue world at the galaxy's edge. The human delegation may now present their military capabilities for evaluation, announced Counselor Vextai, a tall, mantis-like being whose compound eyes reflected the chamber's soft lighting. His translation device converted his chittering speech into something humans could understand. Elena stepped forward to the central platform, which rose smoothly from the floor until she stood at eye level with most of the assembled delegates. A holographic display materialized beside her, showing detailed schematics of human military equipment. "Honored counselors," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems, "humanity comes before you not as conquerors, but as protectors. Our military philosophy centers on defense of our homeworld and the safety of our people." The display showed images of human soldiers, their equipment, and various weapons systems. Elena highlighted their main battle tanks, aircraft, and naval vessels. But when she reached the section on small arms, a ripple of what could only be described as amusement swept through the chamber. "These are your primary infantry weapons?" asked Counselor Zircon, a reptilian being whose species had mastered energy weapons millennia ago. His forked tongue flicked out as he examined the holographic rifle display before him. "Yes, Counselor. The M47 assault rifle has served as our standard infantry weapon for the past 15 years. It fires projectiles at high velocity using chemical propellants." The amusement grew stronger. Several delegates began making sounds that their translation devices interpreted as laughter. Elena kept her expression neutral, though she felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. "Chemical propellants?" The question came from Counselor Nael Thek, whose people had evolved beyond physical weapons entirely, preferring psychic manipulation. "You mean your soldiers must carry solid projectiles and explosive chemicals in a battle?" "That is correct." "How primitive." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Counselor Vextai raised one of his forearms for silence. "Let me ensure I understand correctly. While civilized species employ directed energy weapons, plasma cannons, and molecular disruptors, humans continue to use what amounts to metal tubes that launch small pieces of metal." Elena's jaw tightened slightly. "Our kinetic weapons have proven highly effective in every conflict we've encountered." This statement triggered an outbreak of chittering, buzzing, and electronic noise that the translation systems struggled to convert. Finally, Zircon's voice cut through the chaos. "Effective against what? Stone Age civilizations?" "Counselor Vasquez, perhaps humans are simply unaware of the limitations of their technology. In the galactic community, energy weapons are the baseline. Even our planetary police forces carry plasma weapons that could vaporize your heaviest tanks." "Our weapons may seem simple," Elena replied carefully, "but they've served us well. Sometimes the most elegant solution is also the most reliable." "Reliable?" Nael Thek's mental voice resonated with condescension. "Child, these crude devices you call rifles would be useless against even basic energy shielding. A common trade vessel has defensive systems that would render your projectiles completely ineffective." The Thuronians, who had remained silent until now, produced a sound like grinding stone. Their translator converted it to deep, rumbling laughter. "Little human," spoke their representative, "my people have seen many species join the council. None have arrived with weapons so quaint." Elena felt heat rising in her cheeks, but maintained her composure. Perhaps we could arrange a demonstration? I believe our capabilities might surprise you. This suggestion prompted another wave of alien amusement. Vextai's compound eyes glittered with what might have been humor. Demonstration? You wish to show us how effectively you can throw rocks. Not rocks, counselor. Precision. Zircon leaned forward in his scaled bulk. Precision with primitive weapons is still primitive. It's like being the galaxy's best spear thrower in an age of starships. Nevertheless, Elena said quietly, I maintain my offer. The delegates exchanged looks and sounds of communication. Finally, Vextai spoke again. Very well, human. The Council will observe your demonstration. But, understand this, we've seen the pinnacle of military technology. Your chemical-powered projectile throwers will need to accomplish something truly remarkable to impress civilized minds. Understand completely, Counselor. Excellent. We'll arrange suitable facilities on the moon of Kepler 442b. The testing ground there can accommodate various scenarios without risking populated areas. Vextai paused, his mandibles clicking in what Elena was beginning to recognize as alien skepticism. Though I suspect the greatest risk will be to your own pride. Elena straightened her shoulders. When would you like to schedule this demonstration? 3 cycles from today. That should give you sufficient time to prepare whatever theatrical display you have in mind. 3 cycles will be more than enough. As the session concluded and delegates began filing out of the chamber, Elena overheard fragments of conversation that her universal translator helpfully converted. The general consensus seemed to be that humanity was about to embarrass itself on a galactic stage. A group of young Zelkari military attaches floated past her position, their atmospheric bubbles allowing their voices to carry. Did you see the specifications on those primitive weapons? My grandfather's museum has more advanced armaments. I heard they still use chemical explosives. Chemical explosives? Like something out of a pre-civilization archaeological site. 3 cycles from now, we'll witness either the most impressive miracle in galactic history or the most spectacular demonstration of why some species aren't ready for membership in civilized society. Elena listened to their casual dismissal of everything her species had accomplished and felt a cold smile cross her lips. She thought about the message she would send back to Earth, specifically to a certain military unit stationed at Fort Braxton. 20 years of military service had taught her many things, but perhaps the most important lesson was this: never underestimate your enemy, and never let your enemy know what you're truly capable of until the moment you pull the trigger. The Galactic Council was about to learn why humanity had not only survived on a hostile planet, but had thrived there. They were about to discover that sometimes the most primitive weapon in the right hands was more dangerous than all their advanced technology combined. As Elena walked toward the transport bay, she was already composing her message to Earth. She needed one person for this demonstration. One very specific person with one very specific skill set. The galaxy was about to meet Sergeant Marcus Chun, and nothing would ever be the same. Sergeant Marcus Chun knelt behind a weathered oak tree on the edge of the Appalachian Mountains, his breathing so controlled it seemed like he wasn't breathing at all. Through his rifle scope, he could see a target 1,500 meters away across a valley filled with swirling morning mist. The wind was coming from the southeast at 12 miles per hour, with gusts up to 15. The temperature was dropping as storm clouds gathered overhead. Perfect conditions for an impossible shot. His spotter, Corporal Jessica Barnes, lay beside him with range-finding equipment and wind meters. Winds shifting, Chun. Now southeast at 14 sustained, gust to 18. Marcus made minute adjustments to his scope, calculating windage and elevation in his head with the kind of mathematical precision that most people needed computers for. His rifle was a custom-built precision instrument, based on the standard M47 platform, but modified for extreme long-range accuracy. The stock was perfectly fitted to his shoulder, the trigger tuned to break cleanly at exactly 2.5 pounds of pressure. Target acquired, he whispered, his voice barely audible even to Barnes. Range confirmed at 1,512 meters. Wind steady at 14 southeast. Marcus had been shooting competitively since he was 12 years old, when his grandfather had first taught him to handle a rifle. By 18, he was breaking national records. By 25, he held the world record for longest confirmed kill in combat. Now, At 32, he was widely considered the finest marksman humanity had ever produced. His phone vibrated with an incoming priority message. Without moving his eye from the scope, he nodded to Barnes. "What is it, Corporal?" Barnes checked his secure communication device. Priority Alpha message from, "Wait, this can't be right." "What's wrong?" "It's from the Galactic Council, Sergeant. Someone named Commander Vasquez needs you for something called species representation duty. They want you to report to Cape Canaveral within 48 hours. Marcus finally lowered his rifle and turned to look at his spotter. "The Galactic what now?" "You know, Sergeant, the aliens. The first contact thing from 3 years ago. Apparently, we're up for some kind of membership evaluation, and Commander Vasquez specifically requested you." "Why would she request me?" Barnes grinned. "Maybe they need someone to show the aliens how humans shoot?" Marcus considered this for a moment, then returned to his scope. "After I make this shot." The target downrange was a playing card, the ace of spades, pinned to a board with a small red dot marked in the center. At 1,500 meters, the card was barely visible even through his high-powered scope. The red dot was invisible. This was the kind of shot that separated exceptional marksmen from legendary ones. Marcus controlled his breathing, slowing his heart rate until the rifle's crosshairs moved in perfect sync with his pulse. He calculated wind drift, bullet drop, air density, and a dozen other variables in the space between one heartbeat and the next. The world contracted to a single point of focus, the center of that red dot on a playing card 1,500 meters away. He squeezed the trigger with the same gentle pressure he might use to touch a soap bubble. The rifle bucked against his shoulder with familiar authority. 1,500 meters away, the ace of spades disappeared in a small puff of white smoke as the bullet passed through the exact center of the red dot. "Perfect center shot," Barnes confirmed through his spotting scope. "Sergeant, that was routine." Marcus finished, already beginning to break down his rifle. "Let's pack up. Apparently, I have aliens to meet." 46 hours later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the transport vessel Terra's Pride, staring out at a sight that would have been impossible to imagine just a few days ago. The moon of Kepler, 442b, stretched below them, its surface scarred with ancient impact craters and dust storms that painted the horizon in shades of red and gold. But it wasn't the alien landscape that caught his attention. It was the ships. Dozens of vessels from across the galaxy hung in perfect formation around the moon. Some were sleek and organic, looking like metal flowers that had bloomed in space. Others were geometric and crystalline, refracting starlight into rainbow patterns. The largest ships belonged to species he couldn't even begin to identify, massive constructions that seemed to defy physics with their impossible angles and shifting surfaces. "Impressive, isn't it?" Commander Vasquez joined him at the observation window. She looked tired but determined, like someone who had been fighting an uphill battle for weeks. "Ma'am, with respect, what exactly am I doing here?" Elena smiled grimly. "Saving humanity's reputation, if you're as good as your file suggests." "My file?" Marcus Chun, age 32. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in the Pacific conflict, 1 classified operation I'm not clear to know about. World record holder for longest confirmed combat kill at 2,840 meters. Winner of the International Precision Rifle Championship 4 consecutive years. Your commanding officers describe you as supernaturally accurate and the best shooter in human history. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I just do my job, ma'am." "Your job, Sergeant, is about to become representing the entire human species." Elena gestured toward the alien fleet surrounding them. "Those ships out there belong to beings who think our weapons are museum pieces. They've spent the past 3 days making jokes about humans and their chemical-powered metal throwers." "I see. Do you?" "Because I need you to understand something. This isn't just about impressing aliens with trick shots. If we fail this demonstration, humanity remains isolated. No advanced technology, no galactic trade, no protection from hostile species. Earth stays alone in the dark." Marcus looked out at the alien ships again, seeing them now not as wonders but as judges. "What do they want me to do?" "They've set up targets on the moon's surface. Various ranges, various conditions. They expect you to miss, Sergeant. They expect to prove that human weapons are useless against their technology." "Are they?" Elena's smile turned predatory. "That's what we're going to find out." The transport shuddered as they entered the moon's thin atmosphere. Through the viewports, Marcus could see the testing ground taking shape below them. Alien technology had carved a perfect amphitheater from the moon's surface, with observation platforms rising like silver towers around the edges. "Sergeant," Elena said quietly, "I need you to know something. Intelligence suggests some council species are actively hostile to the idea of human membership. They want us to fail spectacularly. Why? Because we're different. We evolved as predators on a hostile world. Most galactic species evolved from prey animals or developed in peaceful environments. The idea of a species that survived by hunting and fighting makes them uncomfortable." Marcus nodded slowly. "They think we're dangerous. They think we're primitive. But, yes, they also think we're dangerous. Some of them would prefer to see humanity contained on Earth indefinitely." The transport touched down with barely a whisper of sound. Through the docking bay windows, Marcus could see alien beings moving around the testing facility with purposeful efficiency. They wore environmental suits designed for their various physiologies, but even so, he could sense their confidence, their certainty that the primitive humans were about to embarrass themselves. "One more thing, Sergeant," Elena said as they prepared to disembark. "The targets they prepared aren't standard range targets. Intelligence indicates they've designed challenges specifically intended to demonstrate the limitations of kinetic weapons." "What kind of challenges?" "We'll find out together. But Marcus..." She paused at the airlock door. "Whatever they throw at you, remember this. Every human who ever lived, who ever fought, who ever survived against impossible odds, they're all watching through you today." Marcus slung his rifle case over his shoulder and checked his gear one final time. "Then, let's not disappoint them, ma'am." The airlock cycled open, and Sergeant Marcus Chun stepped onto an alien world to defend the honor of a human race with nothing but his grandfather's lessons, 20 years of training, and the most primitive weapon in the galaxy. The observation platforms buzzed with activity as representatives from 47 species gathered to witness what many expected to be humanity's spectacular failure. Marcus stood at the center of the testing ground, feeling completely exposed under the alien moon's pale light. The gravity here was roughly 60% of Earth normal, which would affect his shooting in ways he was still calculating. Counselor Vextai's voice echoed across the amphitheater through translation devices. "Sergeant Shun, the Council has prepared a series of challenges designed to test the practical effectiveness of your primitive kinetic weapons against modern defensive systems." Marcus nodded, saying nothing. He'd learned long ago that in situations like this, it was better to let his shooting do the talking. "Your first target," Vextai continued, "is equipped with basic energy shielding, the kind found on civilian transport vessels. A platform rose from the moon's surface 500 meters away. Mounted on it was what looked like a standard bullseye target, but Marcus could see the telltale shimmer of an energy field surrounding it. The shield wasn't visible to the naked eye, but it distorted the air like heat waves rising from summer asphalt. "The shield will deflect or absorb any projectile with insufficient velocity or mass," announced Counselor Zircon. "Even our children's training weapons can penetrate such basic protection. Surely your chemical-powered rifle can manage this simple task." Marcus studied the target through his scope. The energy shield was real enough. He could see it bending light around the edges. But energy shields had to allow some passage of matter, or they would trap their own air supply. The question was whether his bullets could find the frequency gaps. He loaded a single round into his rifle, a specially designed penetrator round with a tungsten core. The bullet weighed slightly more than standard ammunition and was designed to maintain velocity over extreme distances. Marcus settled into his shooting position, controlling his breathing as the familiar calm settled over him. Through his scope, he could see not just the target, but the subtle variations in the energy shield's intensity. Like all technology, it had patterns and weaknesses. He squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck the energy shield with a flash of blue light. For a moment, it seemed like the projectile had been stopped or deflected. Then, the target exploded in a shower of sparks and debris as the tungsten penetrator punched through the shield's matrix and struck the center of the bullseye. A moment of stunned silence fell over the observation platforms. "Lucky shot," muttered someone in the Zelkari delegation, though their translator made it sound uncertain. "Prepare the second target," Vextai announced, his compound eyes reflecting something that might have been surprise. This time, a target appeared at 800 meters distance. But this wasn't a stationary bullseye. It was moving, following a complex pattern as it darted back and forth across the testing ground. Worse, it was protected by an ablative armor system that would disperse the energy of any impact across its surface. Mobile targets with reactive armor, Zircon explained with renewed confidence. Even if your projectile somehow penetrates the defense matrix, the armor will distribute the impact force, rendering the shot ineffective. Marcus tracked the moving target through his scope. It was following a program pattern, but not a simple one. The target moved in 3 dimensions, rising and falling as well as darting left and right. Hitting it would require calculating not just windage and elevation, but also the target's position several seconds in the future. He loaded another round and began tracking the target's movement. After 30 seconds, he had identified the pattern. The target followed a complex algorithm, but algorithms were predictable once you understood their logic. Marcus led the target by exactly 3.5 seconds, adjusted for the moon's wind patterns, and fired. The bullet caught the target at the peak of its upward arc, striking it with such precision that it bypassed the ablative armor's distribution system entirely. The reactive armor was designed to spread impact across a large surface area, but Marcus had hit the single junction point where all the armor segments connected. The target disintegrated as its structural integrity failed catastrophically. The observation platforms fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. Heavier. Interesting, Vextai said finally. Perhaps these weapons are not quite as primitive as we assumed, but surely they cannot penetrate serious defenses. The third target rose from a concealed position 2 kilometers away. At this distance, it was barely visible even through Marcus's scope. But distance wasn't the real challenge. This target was protected by adaptive camouflage that shifted its appearance and position randomly, making it nearly impossible to acquire. Adaptive stealth technology, announced Nal Thek, his mental voice carrying smug satisfaction. The target's true position shifts continuously. Even our most advanced targeting systems require multiple attempts to achieve a successful lock. Marcus studied the target area through his scope. The adaptive camouflage was impressive. He could see multiple false images dancing around the target's approximate location like mirages in a desert. But camouflage, no matter how advanced, couldn't hide everything. Heat signatures, air displacement, gravitational effects on dust particles. Marcus had hunted in environments where his prey used every trick evolution could devise to avoid detection. This was just technology trying to replicate what nature had perfected over millions of years. He loaded a third round and waited. Patience was as much a part of marksmanship as accuracy. For 3 minutes, he studied the target area, mapping the subtle signs that revealed the target's true position beneath its camouflage. When he fired, the bullet traveled for almost 4 seconds before striking home. The adaptive camouflage flickered and died as the target's control systems failed, revealing the perfect hole punched through its center. Ow! The question came from Counselor Thane, a crystalline being whose species had developed some of the most advanced sensor technology in the galaxy. Our instruments show that target was completely concealed. Marcus lowered his rifle and looked up at the observation platforms. Your technology hides what you can see. It doesn't hide what you can't. Explain. Heat, sound, air displacement, gravitational effects on dust particles. Your camouflage hides the visual spectrum, but it can't hide physics. A ripple of concerned chittering passed through the alien observers. Marcus had just demonstrated that human intuition and observation skills could penetrate technology they considered state-of-the-art. One more test, Vextai announced, but now his voice carried a note of uncertainty. This final challenge will demonstrate the true limitations of kinetic weapons. The fourth target appeared at maximum range, 3 kilometers away, barely visible even to Marcus's enhanced scope. But this target wasn't just distant. It was surrounded by multiple defense systems. Energy shields, ablative armor, adaptive camouflage, and something else that Marcus couldn't immediately identify. Multi-layered defense matrix, Sokan explained. This represents the standard protection found on military vessels. No kinetic weapon has ever penetrated this combination of defenses. Marcus studied the distant target, his mind working through the complex calculations required. 3 kilometers and 60% gravity with unknown wind patterns. Multiple defense systems that would each require different approaches to defeat. And underneath it all, the growing realization that this test wasn't just about proving human weapons were effective, it was about proving they were dangerous. The observation platforms had fallen completely silent now. Marcus could feel the weight of 47 species watching him, waiting to see if one human with one primitive rifle could do something their advanced technology said was impossible. He loaded a final round, his last penetrator bullet. If he missed this shot, the demonstration was over, and humanity would be rejected from the galactic community. But as Marcus settled into his shooting position and began his breathing exercises, he felt the familiar calm that had carried him through 20 years of impossible shots. This was what he was born for. This was what all those hours of practice, all those competitions, all those combat missions had been preparing him for. The crosshairs settled on a distant target, and Marcus Chun prepared to take the most important shot in human history. Marcus lay prone on the alien moon's surface, his rifle steady against the makeshift bipod he'd constructed from equipment in his kit. Through his scope, the target at 3 kilometers looked like a tiny speck surrounded by the shimmer of multiple defense systems. The wind across the moon's surface was unpredictable, swirling in patterns that had no Earth equivalent. He closed his eyes for a moment, running through calculations that pushed his mathematical abilities to their limit. Bullet drop over 3 kilometers in 60% gravity. Wind drift from at least 3 different air currents between his position and the target. The interference patterns of multiple energy shields. The angular deflection caused by the target's adaptive camouflage systems. And then there was the 4th defensive system, the one he'd finally identified through careful observation. The target was surrounded by a localized gravitational field generator, technology that could actually bend space-time around the target, causing projectiles to curve away from their intended path. It was impossible. By every law of physics and every principle of marksmanship he'd ever learned, this shot could not be made. Marcus opened his eyes and looked through his scope again. But impossible was just another word for something nobody had figured out how to do yet. The key was understanding that the gravitational field wasn't random. It was generated by machinery, which meant it followed patterns. And patterns could be predicted, calculated, and compensated for. Marcus began tracking the field fluctuations, counting the microsecond intervals between gravitational pulses. Like everything else in the universe, the field generator operated on a rhythm. He just needed to find it. 30 seconds of observation revealed the pattern. The gravitational field pulsed in a complex sequence, but it was repeatable. Every 14.7 seconds, the field would weaken for exactly 0.2 of a second as the generators recycled their power supply. He would have exactly 1/5 of a second to thread a bullet through multiple defense systems across 3 kilometers of hostile terrain. Marcus loaded his final penetrator round and settled into the perfect shooting position. His breathing slowed until his heart rate dropped below 50 beats per minute. His world contracted to the view through his scope and the rhythmic pulse of the gravitational field. 14.7 seconds. 14.6. 14.5. He began his trigger squeeze at 14.2, applying steady pressure so the rifle would fire at exactly the right moment. 14.0. The gravitational field pulsed and weakened. Energy shields fluctuated as their power system cycled. Adaptive camouflage generators reset their position matrices. Marcus fired. The bullet left the rifle's barrel at precisely the moment when all the target's defensive systems were at their weakest point. It traveled through the thin atmosphere for just over 4 seconds, following a trajectory that Marcus had calculated to account for every variable in its path. The observation platforms were silent as the projectile traced its arc across the alien sky. Even through their advanced sensors, most of the council representatives couldn't track something as small and fast as a rifle bullet over such extreme distance. But Marcus didn't need to track it. He knew, with the certainty that came from decades of shooting, that this bullet would find its mark. 3.9 seconds after firing, The distant target exploded in a brilliant flash of light as the tungsten penetrator punched through every defensive system and struck the target's core with devastating precision. For 10 full seconds, absolute silence reigned over the testing ground. Then, Counselor Vextai's voice cut through the quiet, and for the first time since Marcus had met him, the alien sounded genuinely shaken. That is impossible. Our sensors confirm that all defensive systems were operating at full capacity. Marcus stood up and began breaking down his rifle with the methodical precision of someone who had performed this routine thousands of times. No, sir. They were operating at normal capacity. There's a difference. Explain. Every machine has a cycle. Every defense system has a reset period. Every pattern has a weakness. Marcus finished disassembling his rifle and looked up at the observation platforms. You just need to know how to find it. Zurkon's scaled form leaned forward on the observation platform. You calculated the interaction between 4 separate defensive systems across 3 kilometers of distance with nothing but mental mathematics? Yes, sir. In combat conditions. Under pressure. With a single shot. Yes, sir. The reptilian counselor was quiet for a long moment. What you have just demonstrated, our species has targeting computers dedicated to solving such problems. Quantum processors running millions of calculations per second. And you accomplish the same result with primitive chemical kinetics and thinking. Marcus slung his rifle case over his shoulder. Sometimes the simplest solution is the most effective one. But before anyone could respond, proximity alarms began sounding from the alien ships in orbit. Emergency lights flashed red across the testing facility as defensive systems activated throughout the Council fleet. Hostile contact, announced an automated voice that somehow managed to sound urgent in 47 different languages. Unknown vessels approaching at combat velocity. All ships to battle stations. Through the observation platform's transparent walls, Marcus could see the source of the alarm. 3 massive ships were dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the star system. Unlike the elegant vessels of the Council species, these new arrivals looked like they were designed for one purpose: war. Their hulls were dark and angular, covered with weapon ports and armor plating. As they approached, smaller ships detached from their docking bays like a swarm of deadly insects. Counselor Vextai's compound eyes reflected the red emergency lighting. Hi, Zaida. They must have tracked our fleet here. Marcus had never heard of the Krex High, but he could tell from the fear in the alien voices that these were bad news. Hostile species? Pirates and slavers, Elena answered, having joined him on the testing ground. Intelligence briefings suggested they've been expanding their territory, hitting isolated systems and small colonies. They're jamming our communications, Zurkon reported from his platform. We can't call for reinforcements. The first wave of raider ships was already entering the moon's atmosphere, descending toward the testing facility with clear hostile intent. Marcus counted at least 20 smaller vessels, each one bristling with energy weapons. Our defensive systems are not designed for prolonged combat. Nalthek's mental voice carried notes of panic. We are explorers and diplomats, not warriors. Marcus watched the approaching ships and felt a familiar calm settle over him. This was what humans had trained for their entire evolutionary history. Not demonstrations or political theater, but the moment when survival depended on superior firepower and the will to use it. Commander, he said quietly, I'm going to need more ammunition. Elena looked at him with growing understanding. Sergeant, those are military spacecraft with advanced armor and shielding. Yes, ma'am. They are. Your rifle fires kinetic projectiles. Yes, ma'am. You're suggesting that you can engage spacecraft with a rifle. Marcus looked up at the approaching raiders, calculating range and approach vectors with the same methodical precision he'd used on the testing targets. Ma'am, I'm suggesting that these pirates are about to learn why humans evolved to be apex predators. The first raider ship was now less than 2 kilometers away and closing fast. Its pilot, confident in his vessel's superiority over primitive human weapons, was making the same mistake the Council had made just minutes before. He was underestimating what one human with one rifle could accomplish when properly motivated. Marcus opened his rifle case and began assembling his weapon with swift, practiced movements. Around him, the observation platforms buzzed with alien voices discussing retreat and surrender. But Marcus Chun was done retreating. It was time to show the galaxy what humans did when their backs were against the wall. The first Krexhai Raider ship swooped low over the testing facility, its pilot clearly expecting the assembled council members to scatter in panic. Instead, he found a lone human lying prone on the moon's surface, rifle trained directly at his cockpit. Marcus had loaded an armor-piercing round designed for extreme penetration. As the Raider ship passed overhead at less than 500 meters altitude, he led the target by exactly the right amount and squeezed the trigger. The bullet punched through the ship's cockpit window and struck the pilot in the center of his chest. The vessel, suddenly, without guidance, cartwheeled through the thin atmosphere and crashed into the moon's surface in a spectacular explosion of twisted metal and burning fuel. The remaining 19 raiders immediately changed tactics. These weren't the careful, measured approaches they had used against helpless civilian targets. Suddenly, facing an enemy who could kill their pilots through their cockpit armor, they began evasive maneuvers and activated their defensive systems. How is this possible? Zurkon's voice carried across the testing ground's communication system. That ship had military-grade armor plating. Marcus was already tracking his second target, a heavier assault craft that was approaching from the east. Armor plating is designed to stop energy weapons and explosive warheads. It's not designed to stop a small, dense projectile traveling at 3,000 feet per second. The assault craft pilot had learned from his comrade's mistake. He kept his distance and began firing energy bolts at Marcus's position. The blast scorched the moon's surface around the testing facility, forcing the alien observers to take cover behind reinforced barriers. But energy weapons had a weakness that most galactic species had forgotten. They announced exactly where they came from. Every shot the Raider fired revealed his precise location to someone who knew how to track muzzle flashes. Marcus waited for the ship to settle into a firing pattern, then put a bullet through its main power coupling. The vessel's energy weapons died instantly, and without defensive systems, it became an easy target for his next shot, which penetrated the pilot compartment and sent the craft spinning into the moon's surface. 18 left, Marcus announced calmly as he reloaded. The remaining raiders had learned their lesson about approaching too close to the human marksman. They spread out across the sky, using hit-and run tactics while maintaining enough distance to avoid Marcus's rifle fire. Or so they thought. Marcus had been calculating the effective range of his rifle since the moment he'd arrived on this moon. In the reduced gravity and thin atmosphere, his bullets could travel much farther than they ever could on Earth. More importantly, the raiders' evasive maneuvers followed predictable patterns. They thought they were being random, but they were actually following their training, which made them predictable to someone who understood tactical movement. A raider ship circled at what its pilot thought was a safe distance of 2 kilometers. Marcus tracked it through his scope, calculating the lead time necessary to hit a target moving at that speed and distance. When he fired, the bullet took 3.2 seconds to reach its target, striking the ship's engine housing with enough force to trigger a cascade failure that tore the craft apart. Impossible range. The shout came from the Zelkari delegation. No kinetic weapon can maintain accuracy at such distance. Marcus was already acquiring his next target. You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. Ship after ship fell to his rifle. Each pilot thought they were beyond the range of primitive human weapons. Each pilot discovered too late that range was meaningless to someone who understood physics, mathematics, and the art of shooting. But Marcus was facing a new problem: ammunition. His supply of specialized rounds was running low, and the remaining raiders were beginning to coordinate their attacks. Instead of approaching individually, they were forming up for a mass assault that would overwhelm his ability to engage multiple targets. Sergeant, Elena's voice crackled through his communication system. 12 hostiles remaining, approaching from multiple vectors. You can't engage them all simultaneously. Marcus studied the tactical situation through his scope. She was right. The raiders had learned from watching their comrades die. They were approaching from 6 different directions, timing their assault, so they would all arrive at the testing facility at the same moment. But they had made one critical mistake. They assumed Marcus was fighting alone. Commander, are there any other humans on the council ships? Negative. You're the only Terran military personnel present. What about the council delegations? Any of them have military training? There was a pause as Elena consulted with the alien representatives. Counselor Vextai says several species have security personnel aboard their vessels, but they're not trained for this type of combat. Marcus made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone who hadn't spent 20 years learning to think like a weapon. Patch me through to all council military personnel. I need to give them a crash course in human combat tactics. Sergeant, they don't use kinetic weapons. They don't understand. They're about to. Over the next 60 seconds, Marcus transmitted the most important lesson humanity had learned in 10,000 years of warfare. Sometimes the best defense is an overwhelming offense. He explained to the alien security forces how to predict enemy movement patterns, how to coordinate fire from multiple positions, and how to turn the raiders' own tactics against them. Most importantly, he taught them something no galactic species had ever learned: how to think like predators instead of prey. When the final wave of raiders attacked, they expected to find scattered, panicked aliens hiding behind defensive barriers. Instead, they found themselves caught in a coordinated crossfire from every council ship in orbit. The alien energy weapons might have been designed for different purposes than human kinetic weapons, but they followed the same basic principles of physics. Properly aimed and coordinated, they were devastatingly effective. The remaining 12 raider ships found themselves fighting not just one impossible human marksman, but an entire fleet of aliens who had suddenly remembered that sometimes violence was the only answer to violence. The battle lasted less than 5 minutes. When it was over, the wreckage of 20 Krexi ships littered the moon's surface, and absolute silence reigned over the testing facility. Marcus stood up from his shooting position and safe his rifle. Around him, alien beings who had been making jokes about primitive human weapons just hours before looked at him with something approaching awe. Counselor Vextai's voice, when it finally came, carried a note of deep respect that hadn't been there before. Sergeant Shun, in the space of 1 standard hour, you have demonstrated capabilities that challenge everything we thought we knew about kinetic weapons and human tactical thinking. Yes, sir. More than that, you coordinated the defense of 47 different species using principles of warfare that none of us had ever encountered. Marcus slung his rifle across his shoulder. Yes, sir. The question now becomes, what does the Galactic Council do with a species that can accomplish such things? Elena stepped forward, and Marcus could see the pride shining in her eyes. Counselor, I believe the question answers itself. Humanity has proven that we bring unique capabilities to the galactic community. Our weapons may seem primitive, but they're effective. Our tactics may seem crude, but they work. And when the situation demands it, we can teach others to fight as we fight. Zircon's scaled form moved forward on his observation platform. Commander Vasquez, there is something you must understand. What your species has demonstrated today, it changes the balance of power in this galaxy. There are hostile forces out there far more dangerous than simple raiders. Forces that have been expanding their territory because no one could stop them. Are you saying you want our help? I'm saying, Vextai replied, his compound eyes reflecting the alien moonlight, that the Galactic Council needs to reconsider everything we thought we knew about warfare, about weapons, and about the species we call primitive. He paused, looking down at Marcus with what might have been wonder. The motion to grant full council membership to the human species passes unanimously. Welcome to the galactic community, humans. We have a feeling you're going to change everything. Marcus looked up at the observation platforms filled with representatives from 47 worlds, then at the wreckage of enemy ships scattered across the moon's surface, and finally at his rifle, the same basic design humans had been using for centuries. Sometimes the most primitive weapon in the right hands was indeed more dangerous than all the advanced technology in the galaxy combined. And the galaxy was about to learn that the hard way.